A lie in a relationship rarely announces itself. It doesn't walk in with a confession or a dramatic moment of truth. Most of the time, it begins with something much smaller. A simple question that gets answered with another question. A story that feels slightly incomplete. A phone that suddenly feels less like a device and more like a locked vault. On their own, these moments seem harmless, easy to overlook. But when they start appearing again and again, they slowly form a pattern, one that many men fail to recognize until the damage has already been done. The real problem isn't that the warning signs are invisible. The real problem is that most men were never taught how to read them. And when you can't interpret the pattern, you start doing something dangerous. You begin doubting your instincts instead of trusting them. In this video, we're going to break down 6 lies women often tell in relationships, and more importantly, how recognizing these patterns can protect you from being quietly manipulated. Number 1, answering a question with another question. This is one of the oldest and most reliable ways people avoid telling the truth. And once you learn to recognize it, you will start seeing it almost everywhere. Imagine a situation like this. You ask a very simple question. Where were you last night? It's not aggressive. It's not an accusation. It's just a straightforward question that should have a straightforward answer. But instead of answering directly, she responds with something like, "Why are you asking me that?" Or even worse, "Why are you always questioning me?" And just like that, the conversation shifts. Suddenly, it's no longer about where she was. Now the focus is on your tone, your suspicion, your behavior. That shift isn't accidental. Psychologically, this tactic is known as deflection. When someone feels pressure from a question they're not comfortable answering, they redirect that pressure back toward the person asking it. Instead of providing information, they create confusion. Rather than addressing the question itself, they challenge the intention behind the question. Why does this work so often? Because most men fall right into the trap. The moment she asks, "Why are you asking?" Many men immediately begin explaining themselves. They start defending their curiosity. They reassure her that they're not accusing her of anything. And in the process, the original question quietly disappears from the center of the conversation. But here's the key insight. When someone answers a question with another question, they're not really participating in the conversation. They're buying time. The human brain often needs a few seconds to construct a believable story. When a question arrives unexpectedly, those seconds become extremely valuable. A counter question creates that window. While you're busy explaining yourself, the other person is silently preparing the answer they plan to give you. That's why the smartest response isn't emotional and it isn't confrontational. It's calm, it's steady, and it simply brings the conversation back to the original point. Instead of arguing about why you asked, you reset the frame. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just asking where you were." Notice what this does. It removes the distraction and places the focus back where it belongs. Men often lose control of conversations because they allow the topic to be changed. But the person who controls the conversation is usually the person who keeps the focus exactly where it started. And when the focus stays on the original question, deflection becomes much harder to hide behind. Number 2, vague answers. Another common pattern appears when someone technically answers your question, but gives you almost no real information. It sounds like a response, yet when you examine it closely, you realize it reveals very little. For example, you ask, "Who did you go out with?" And the answer you receive is simply, "A friend." That's it. No name, no context, no details that help you understand what actually happened. At first glance, it may not even look like a lie. After all, she did answer the question, but what she gave you wasn't clarity. What she gave you was distance. This pattern is often referred to as information control. When people are telling the truth, they tend to provide details naturally. The brain recalls memories as scenes. Who was there? Where it happened? What time it was? What people said? But when someone is hiding something, details suddenly become dangerous. Every detail can be checked. A name can be verified. A location can be questioned. A timeline can be compared with other facts. So the safest strategy becomes staying vague. A friend. Some people. We just hung out. Nothing special. Notice how each of these responses creates a kind of fog around the situation. Words are spoken, but the full picture never becomes clear. Research in deception psychology has repeatedly shown that people who are fabricating stories tend to provide fewer concrete details than people who are telling the truth. It's not because they want to appear mysterious, it's because details increase the risk of contradictions, and contradictions are where lies begin to collapse. That's why vague answers often feel uncomfortable, even when you can't immediately explain why. Your intuition senses that information is being withheld. But once again, many men respond to this moment the wrong way. They either ignore that uneasy feeling or they jump straight into accusations. Both reactions usually make the situation worse. The smarter approach is much simpler. Ask for clarity, not aggressively, not emotionally, just specifically. A friend? Which friend? Where did you go? What time did you leave? These questions do something extremely powerful. They force the conversation to move from fog into detail. And detail is the natural enemy of deception. Someone telling the truth can usually walk through details without hesitation, but someone trying to maintain a constructed story often begins to struggle the moment the conversation becomes precise, because vague answers survive inside ambiguity. They rarely survive in the light of specifics. Number 3, delayed responses. In the past, people had to lie face to face. Today, relationships often unfold through screens, text messages, read receipts, typing bubbles that appear and disappear. And in this environment, a new pattern has become surprisingly common: the delayed response. Picture a situation like this. You send a simple message: "Where are you right now?" Nothing aggressive, just a normal question. You see that the message was delivered. A few moments later, it shows as read. And then, silence. 10 minutes pass. 20, 30. An hour later, a reply finally arrives. "Sorry, I was busy." Now, to be fair, sometimes that explanation is completely true. People get busy. Phones get ignored. Life happens. But what matters isn't the moment, it's the pattern. Because sometimes that silence isn't about being occupied. Sometimes it's about building a story. When someone receives a question they aren't prepared to answer honestly, the first instinct is often to buy time. Time to think. Time to organize details. Time to decide what version of events sounds believable. A few extra minutes can make a huge difference when someone is constructing a narrative. They might replay what happened. They might check earlier messages. They might even contact someone else to make sure their stories match. And while all of this is happening, you're sitting on the other side of the conversation wondering why a simple question suddenly requires so much time. This is one of the strange realities of modern relationships. Technology has made communication instant, but it has also made deception easier to manage. Messages can be deleted, timelines can be adjusted, stories can be edited before they're ever spoken. But there's an important distinction here. A single delayed response does not mean someone is lying. Life is unpredictable. Phones get left behind, meetings run long, batteries die. What reveals the truth is repetition. If someone consistently takes a long time to answer very simple questions, especially questions about where they are, who they're with, or what they're doing, that pattern deserves your attention. Because patterns rarely happen by accident, and the worst mistake a man can make in that moment is panic, sending 10 messages in a row, demanding explanations, letting anxiety take control of the situation. The stronger move is the opposite. Stay calm, pay attention, and watch for the pattern, because once a pattern reveals itself, the story behind it usually becomes much easier to understand. Number 4, body language that doesn't match the words. One of the most overlooked signals in any conversation is the body. People spend so much energy focusing on what is being said that they forget something important. The human body often reacts to stress before the mind finishes constructing a lie. And for most people, lying creates stress. When someone tells the truth, The brain simply retrieves a memory. The event already exists, and they are just describing what happened. But when someone lies, the brain has to do something much more complex. It has to invent information, keep that invented story consistent, and at the same time monitor how the other person is reacting. That mental balancing act creates pressure, and the body often reveals it. You might notice that she suddenly avoids eye contact when answering a certain question, not the casual kind of looking away that happens in normal conversation, but a deliberate effort to avoid meeting your gaze. You might also notice excessive blinking, almost as if her body is trying to break the moment of connection. Sometimes posture changes as well. Arms may cross tightly over the chest, hands slide into pockets, shoulders shift in a way that feels more defensive than relaxed. Each of these signals is small and easy to dismiss when viewed on its own, but when they appear together, they can point to something deeper. Researchers who study nonverbal communication have long observed that deception often increases physiological tension. The body becomes slightly less natural. Movements feel less fluid. Small defensive gestures appear without conscious intention. Now, an important caution is necessary here. Body language is not a perfect lie detector. People look away for many different reasons. Some individuals cross their arms simply because that position feels comfortable. Nervousness can appear even when someone is telling the truth. This is why interpreting a single gesture in isolation is rarely reliable. The real signal appears when several elements stop aligning with each other. Her words say one thing, her body communicates something different, and the story itself does not fully fit the moment. When those layers begin to conflict, your intuition often starts telling you that something feels off. Most men ignore that feeling. They convince themselves they are overthinking the situation. They try to remain logical by focusing only on the words being spoken. But words are only one piece of communication. A more observant approach is much simpler. Watch for consistency. Do the words match the tone? Does the tone match the body language? And does the body language match the story being told? When everything lines up, conversations feel natural and relaxed. But when the body begins to quietly argue with the story, the truth is often closer to the surface than it appears. Number 5. The story keeps changing. This is the point where many lies begin to unravel. At first, the explanation sounds simple, clear, and even convincing. You ask about something that happened the night before, and she says, "I went out to dinner with a friend, nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious." But a day or two later, the story shifts slightly. Now you hear, "Well, actually, we had a drink before dinner." Then a few days later, another small detail appears. "Oh, and a couple of other people joined us later." Each version sounds minor on its own. None of the changes feel dramatic enough to start an argument, but when you step back and look at the entire timeline, something becomes clear. The story is evolving. This happens because lies are difficult to maintain over time. When someone tells the truth, they don't have to remember every exact sentence they said earlier. The event already happened, and memory simply retrieves the same experience again. But when someone invents a story, the brain has to remember the story itself, every detail, every version, every statement that was previously shared. Psychologists often refer to this as cognitive load. Maintaining a fabricated narrative requires constant mental effort. The brain has to track the lie, protect it from contradiction, and adjust it when new questions appear. Eventually, that mental pressure begins to create cracks. Details slip, timelines shift, new pieces suddenly appear that were never mentioned before, and often the person telling the story doesn't even realize the inconsistencies they're creating. This is why the most revealing moments rarely happen during the first conversation. They happen later, when the same topic comes up again. When the same question is asked in a slightly different way, and suddenly the answer sounds a little different. A man who immediately explodes with accusations usually shuts down the opportunity to see these patterns clearly. Arguments force people into defensive positions, and once someone feels attacked, the conversation stops revealing useful information. The more effective approach is surprisingly calm. Listen carefully, allow the story to unfold, and later, revisit the same subject naturally. Remind me again, Who else was there that night? If the story stays consistent, the situation may truly be exactly what it seemed. But if the details keep shifting, that inconsistency often speaks louder than any direct confrontation ever could, because the truth rarely needs revisions, but a lie almost always does. Number 6, extreme secrecy around the phone. In modern relationships, the phone has become more than just a device. It's a diary, a communication hub, and sometimes a vault that holds the most private parts of someone's life. Text messages, social media conversations, direct messages, call histories, photos, even deleted threads that once existed. All of it lives inside a small object that most people keep within arm's reach almost every hour of the day. Because of this, behavior around the phone can sometimes reveal more than words ever will. You might begin noticing small habits. She always keeps the phone face down on the table. If a notification appears, the screen is turned away quickly. She carries the phone everywhere, even into the next room for something that would normally take only a few seconds. If you casually reach for the phone to check something or make a quick call, the reaction is immediate, protective, almost reflexive. Again, this alone does not automatically mean someone is lying. Everyone deserves privacy. Healthy relationships still allow personal space, and not every locked phone hides something suspicious. But there is a difference between normal privacy and intense defensiveness. Normal privacy feels calm. Extreme secrecy feels tense. The difference becomes clearer when this behavior appears alongside the other patterns we discussed earlier. Vague answers, delayed responses, stories that slowly shift over time. When those signals combine with unusually protective behavior around the phone, the situation begins forming a clearer picture. Because the phone is where modern conversations happen. If someone is hiding communication, that device becomes the one place they cannot allow anyone else to explore. That's why people who have something to conceal often develop habits around their phones without even realizing it. The stronger response for a man in that situation is not control. It is observation. Demanding access to someone's phone usually creates conflict without creating clarity. Arguments escalate, defenses rise, and trust can collapse even faster. But transparency in a healthy relationship tends to appear naturally. Two people who have nothing to hide usually move through daily life without constant tension around their devices. And when a phone begins to feel like a guarded safe rather than a normal object, it is often a signal worth paying attention to. So what should you actually do when you begin noticing these patterns? Recognizing deception is one thing. Handling it wisely is something else entirely. The first step is understanding why the lie exists in the first place. Not every lie comes from the same motivation. Some people lie because they are afraid of conflict. Some lie to hide mistakes. And sometimes a lie appears because someone is trying to control the emotional balance of the relationship. Understanding the motive does not excuse the behavior, but it helps you see the situation clearly instead of reacting purely from emotion. The second step is trusting your instincts. Many men sense when something feels wrong long before they can logically explain it. But instead of listening to that instinct, they convince themselves they are imagining things. They tell themselves they are overthinking. Often, that instinct is simply your mind noticing inconsistencies your conscious brain has not fully processed yet. The third step is challenging the story with calm logic. This does not mean shouting. It does not mean making accusations without evidence. It means asking clear questions and expecting clear answers. Conversations grounded in facts leave much less room for confusion. And finally, there must be honesty. Not every lie destroys a relationship. People make mistakes. People panic. Sometimes people choose the wrong response in a difficult moment. But healthy relationships cannot survive without transparency. If honesty disappears, trust slowly disappears with it. And once trust is gone, the foundation of the relationship begins to crack in ways that are extremely difficult to repair. Lies in relationships rarely begin with something dramatic. They usually start small, a question that gets redirected instead of answered, a detail that quietly disappears from a story, a message that takes strangely long to come back, a version of events that sounds slightly different the next time you hear it. Individually, these moments may not seem like much. Most people dismiss them. They tell themselves it's nothing. They convince themselves they are simply overthinking. But over time, small inconsistencies can quietly erode something far more important than the moment itself: trust. And once trust begins to weaken, the entire emotional structure of the relationship becomes unstable. Now, here is the important part. The goal is not to become suspicious of everything. Living in constant suspicion can destroy a relationship just as quickly as dishonesty can. The real goal is awareness. When you understand the patterns we talked about today, you do not need to investigate, control, or interrogate. You simply observe. You pay attention to whether words, behavior, and stories remain consistent over time. Because people who are telling the truth usually do not struggle to stay consistent. But when someone is hiding something, that consistency eventually becomes difficult to maintain. And the man who understands these patterns is far less likely to be manipulated by them. If this conversation helped you see relationship dynamics in a clearer way, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future discussions like this. And if you have ever experienced one of these situations yourself, share your perspective in the comments. Sometimes hearing someone else's story is exactly what another person needs to finally recognize the truth they've been trying to ignore.